Okay, so I'm going to start, and I apologize for those of you who were on the original site and saw me for about a minute, and then it cut out. That was completely on my end. I clicked a wrong button and was not able to recover this webinar. So we're going to move along. People that join in can catch up. The good thing is this will be archived. I'll put the archive up on my website. It'll also have a private link to my YouTube page, so you can watch it whenever you want. So in setting up this webinar, I didn't expect to get a huge response. There were nearly 100 people signed up. So in terms of group chat and question and answer, we're going to set some ground rules because this webinar is about moving forward with a new foundation for effective communication based in cognitive science. And we're not here to debate the merits of that. If that's something that you have questions about, we can talk about that in a different forum. This is to move forward with effective communications. So I had over 30 questions submitted for this webinar in advance. So that's a lot of questions, and most of them were along a single theme, and that was what is effective framing? How do we use it in our communities effectively? What can the DPW do to effectively frame? Is this just rhetoric? What is this all about? Is it just about keeping up with conservatives and rhetoric? And then also specific issue questions. So what I've done tonight is I've put together a presentation that is a combination of me talking, a little bit of group discussion at the end, some PowerPoint slides, and some really interesting videos to help answer the questions and, again, move us forward with effective communications. So the format is going to be, I'm going to give about an hour presentation. The group chat is open. There's a link to my website I've already put up on the group chat, and you can check that out if you want. And it's going to be about 1 hour, and then I will leave time at the end. I will open up the Q&A forum, which will appear in your right sidebar once that's open. If you have an urgent question or an urgent comment, you can post it in the group chat, which is also along your right toolbar. So basically, we're going to start out. Here's what we're going to cover. Just a quick overview. First of all, we're going to look at why framing is critical to progressives right now, why we need to start right now, why we can't wait, and why framing is so important. The second thing is to look at what framing and progressive values actually mean for effective communications. There's a lot of talk about we need to do messaging, we need to do framing. Nobody really is got a handle on what that looks like. So I'm going to present tonight what an effective framing campaign would do and what that would look like. There's been a lot of requests for a contrast of the recent governor's race in terms of framing and messaging. So we're going to take a look at that. And then look at how to effectively build capacity to frame for future change. And then after that, we'll take questions. So to start out with, I'm going to open up a PowerPoint slide here. So let's look at this in terms of our progressive past, which progressives were great at framing in the past, the conservative present, and then the progressive future, and what we can do to forward progressive values and progressive vision. So why is framing important? So if you think about all the different issues we believe in as progressives, you see images of them. They're going to conjure up emotions, values. And what we believe as progressives is really based on a moral system, which is largely unconscious in all of us. What we need to do to move progressive vision forward is to make that conscious through effective communications. And it's something, as progressives, we haven't been real good at in the past. One thing that comes up as people start asking questions about how should I message this issue? How should I message that issue? Is the idea that every issue has a unified moral framing. And that needs to be communicated repeatedly when you are talking not only about issues, but when you are communicating about anything. And that's something else that progressives are not good at. In fact, I've had conversations with candidates recently who talk about our shared values about education or our shared values about the environment. And the question I ask is, how are those values? You're talking about issues, you're not talking about values. And in fact, conservatives have shared values about education. They're very different from ours. They communicate them much better and effectively than progressives do. So we're going to look at that in terms of creating unified moral framing that encompasses all issues, which will then amplify our vision at a greater to greater effect, and of course it will unify across all issues. But why are current methods ineffective? We've been seeing a decline of progressive vision in public discourse for the last 40 years. And why does that happen? Well, first of all, we rely on this idea that if we just tell people the facts, they will start to reason their way to the right conclusion. Well, we know through cognitive science and other research that that's not true. People vote more for morals and values, not on a laundry list of facts. The other idea is to tell a story, is to create a narrative about your issue that sets one person as a hero and one person as a villain. That can be very powerful, but what's important to understand is that that story can be told and reinforce the conservative frame, which we'll get to the conservative frame in a bit, and unconsciously reinforce it. So in terms of framing, we need to understand what framing is. And cognitive science, neuroscience, linguistics, psychology, all give us an insight as to what cognitive science is, and it has to do with how our brains function. And our brains function in terms of frames. And what are frames? Framing is thinking. It's the simplest, most ordinary, common thing you do to the point that you don't even think about it. In fact, we know that thought is physical. Words and ideas aren't sitting out there in the air to be picked out of air. Thought is physical, and it's based on your physical experience. So what framing does is framing is neural circuitry in your brain that connects different regions of the brain very quickly, unconsciously, and provides context for everything you understand about the world. So when we talk about framing an issue, we're not just talking about providing some type of random context for an issue. We are talking about evoking a physical circuitry for a physically embodied worldview. In other words, the neural circuit for that frame. So when we talk about framing as thinking, it's as simple as if I say the word restaurant. I say the word restaurant, you have hundreds of thousands of thoughts unconsciously activated through neural circuitry that provide you, based on your life experience, with what you believe a restaurant to be. Some of you may have thought of Culver's, some of you may have thought of a fine dining restaurant like L'Etoile, but in any event, you have specific ideas of restaurants and roles that occur within that frame. You have waiters and waitresses and cooks and pots and pans and dishes and dishwashers and water and coffee and wine and beverages. You would not expect to find an elephant in a restaurant for all intents and purposes. So that's an idea of what framing is. So in terms of thinking, we actually now know that Descartes was wrong, that thought is not rational and requires emotion. And this is critical to framing because as framing is mostly unconscious, that emotive thought is largely unconscious, as you see there. In fact, we know that the best scientific estimate is that it actually accounts for 98% of your brain activity, which is an astonishing number when you consider that we like to think of ourselves as rational beings, yet we only rationally, consciously think about 2% of our brain activity. To give you an idea of the power of the unconscious, new research shows that your unconscious thought influences your physical action and behavior. So for example, if you were the subject of a cognitive perception test, you would be shown very quickly this hollow sphere. And then just a couple milliseconds later, very quickly, you would see this image pop up. What subjects report perceiving is actually this. Now, why is that important? It's important because unconsciously, your brain is using existing knowledge through framing and neural circuitry to fill those knowledge gaps. It goes back in time to the strongest circuit, which today, in terms of public policy, politics, and social discourse, the conservative frame is the strongest circuitry that is available to us. Therefore, your brain is constantly and unconsciously filling knowledge gaps with conservative information without conscious thought. And we'll get to some examples of that. So what are the important takeaways of this research? The first one is that we are all physically connected to each other in the world around us. There is nothing floating out there that is magically going to spark creativity or thought or ideas. It is physically embodied within us and is activated largely when we connect with each other in the world around us. That's a critical point. It is that physical connection that gives rise to meaningful thought and defines our experiences through framing, which is begun from the moment you're born. Your brain processes this almost entirely unconsciously, and as I like to call the conservative message or drumbeat, it is unconsciously reinforced everywhere. And it has actually become hypnotic at a cognitive level because you don't even realize that you're reinforcing it. So the only way to break that hypnotic drumbeat is to consciously shift the frame and be aware of what that drumbeat sounds like and looks like. So how is framing critical to progressives? And this is important, again, when we get down to issues and people looking for these magic bullet phrases that will change public opinion on an issue. It's important to understand that those don't exist. And all messages have a frame. And that frame defines your moral worldview. People vote and respond to those morals and values, and that more people vote on moral frames than issues. And we have a situation now in largely America and the world in general. We have a state of what's called hypocognition in terms of progressive ideas, which means that they're basically non-existent. They're virtually extinct. And we have to start activating them effectively in public discourse in order to restore progressive ideas and vision. That's what framing is all about. They're incredibly powerful. If you take a look at this little screenshot from a quote by Fred Rogers, he's strongly evoking the progressive idea of community, shared responsibility, that we are our brother's keeper, and that the people that see that need and respond empathetically to others are what Fred Rogers calls his heroes. On the other hand, we have a quote by James Dobson, which perfectly illustrates the conservative view of women, which is that women are merely waiting for their husbands to assume leadership. And we'll get to the fact that that speaks to a hierarchy that is fundamental to conservative ideas and the conservative frame. Well, the bottom line about what conservatives know and have been doing effectively for a long time, and we're going to get to how long in a minute, they know that frames are necessary to communicate values. And I've gotten this question a lot. It came up in the pre-webinar questions, that framing is not propaganda. It's not just rhetoric that is clever wordsmithing to keep up with conservatives. Framing is about effectively communicating fundamental truths about the things we believe. It's necessary to be honest and authentic, and we see that where candidates are effective in evoking the progressive frame, and they are authentic and they believe that at their core, those candidates are successful. So you need authentic people to communicate authentic values. Conservatives know really well how to communicate outside issue silos. Virtually every issue can be connected back to just a couple conservative ideas, and we'll get to those in a minute. They also know that if the facts don't reflect the frame a person believes, they reject the facts in favor of the frame. And you're probably all laughing right now because you deeply understand after the last few elections that that's true. And it's one of the reasons people vote against their self-interest all the time. And most importantly, people are looking for a moral connection. There's no point in giving people a laundry list of issues when they are looking for a moral connection. Finally, this came up in the pre-questions, is that repetition embeds frames into the brain, which is why you hear conservatives evoking the same message over and over and over again. Right to work, right to work, right to work. It embeds that moral idea, which is based in the conservative frame, into your brain. So now I just want to step back, now that you've been inundated with kind of the basics of why framing is important. And we're going to just take a brief history lesson, because this came up as a pre-question also, is how is it that conservatives dominate so much? How have they come to just completely dominate public discourse in every issue? And this is going to demonstrate to you that not only has it been conscious and intentional, but it's also been something that has been based in effective messaging. And they didn't know that it was framing at the beginning, as you'll see, but it evolved into that as something that's completely methodical. So we start out with FDR and the New Deal in the 1930s. And even that little quote there gives you a great idea of how he's evoking progressive vision and ideas. And the fact is, he's talking about our progress shouldn't be measured by whether we provide abundance to those who already have much. It's whether we provide enough for those who have too little. And FDR was brilliant at communicating the New Deal as a moral imperative. And in fact, one of the knocks on FDR by conservatives, corporate conservatives at the time, was that his speeches often sounded more like sermons. And I have a segment from a 1936 campaign speech, which I'm going to stop the screen share. We're going to pull up the video here. And those who are opposing his New Deal are on the other side of the street, framing them as immoral. That's a really, really critical statement. So let's flip back to the PowerPoint slides here quickly. Okay. So back up. So there's the quote, the functional quote there. Your government walks on the same side of the street as the Good Samaritan. So in response to the New Deal, in the 1940s, starting early 1940, late 1930s, corporations were freaking out. This group through the National Association of Manufacturers started this campaign with major corporations to save capitalism. And it was funded by all the major corporations of the day. Sun Oil, you name it, Chase Bank, JP Morgan Chase. They recruited Reverend James Fifield out of Los Angeles, who was a conservative evangelical on the West Coast. And what James Fifield does is he starts this Freedom Under God campaign. It actually evolved into the 50s and the 60s, which launched our One Nation Under God. But this Freedom Under God campaign was a national campaign. It was coordinated by James Fifield and the National Association of Manufacturers. And the basic idea was it framed the New Deal as being anti-Christian. because nothing was more godly and Christian than capitalism. And I'm sure you're all laughing now or having deja vu with what's going on today, but this started back in the 1940s. And progressives haven't had a real values-based response to that ever since. In addition to this corporate Christian movement, the conservatives started this anti-communism movement, spawning out of the corporate Christian movement. And so there's another video here that I'm going to pull up. So basically, it was based on this idea of personal liberty and freedom under God, and that capitalism embodied these values of liberty and freedom under God, and as you'll see, strongly evokes the conservative frame. The next video is the 64 Goldwater campaign. Many of you have probably heard. It's Goldwater accepting the nomination in 1964 to be the Republican candidate for president, and he talks about legitimizing future extremism in defense of liberty, as in personal liberty. This speech was grounded in traditional American values. It evoked the conservative frame of self-discipline, self-reliance, and also of the government or the public as being immoral. So then in 1968, we advanced from Goldwater, who lost. Remember, Goldwater lost by a landslide, but he started legitimizing this idea of extremism. And you come into the Nixon campaign of 68, where it actually becomes a methodological campaign that begins the conservative populist movement against the so-called liberal elite. And Nixon was going to be the law and order president and bring discipline to all the hippies and the liberal academics and people fighting for their civil rights and all the women fighting for equal rights. He was going to be the disciplinarian president to basically stand up for, as you hear it all the time, American family values. Oh, we lost the screen share. Yeah, okay, here we go. I think. There we go. Okay. So then 1971, we have the Lewis Powell memo. Many of you who have listened to Progressive Talk Radio have heard about the Powell memo, and it was called the attack of the free enterprise system. And what Powell did was he created the funding arm through the National Chamber of Commerce for all these think tanks, judicial and academic dominance through endowed chairs, judicial conservative seminars all over the country, which still take place today, which leads us to contemporary relative to today, the Heritage Foundation, which most of you know, was created as a result of the Powell memo. And that has strongly established conservative dominance in terms of messaging and everything. So briefly, why is this important? Well, through all the history, what we've come to know through research is that the frame defines your moral worldview. So you have the progressive frame, which is based on the nurture and parent family. You have the strict father family, which is the conservative frame. And how are these arrived at? They are metaphorical. It comes from the basic idea of how you were first governed, which was, of course, in your family. And you have the two metaphorical models which translate to directly everything in current life. We have religion, we have strongly conservative religion, we have strongly progressive religion. So it translates to all different areas of life. So just briefly, the tenets of progressive democracy as evoked by the nurture and parent metaphor. So it's based on empathy. Empathy is the responsibility to care for oneself and others. Authority is gained through an ethic of excellence. We want our best and brightest to be our progressive leaders. Democracy, then, coming out of empathy and responsibility, is caring citizens who act responsibly for each other. This is critically important because it means that, again, we take responsibility for others, as FDR evoked in the New Deal. So what does progressive freedom mean? We don't talk about progressive freedom. We're afraid to talk about progressive freedom because we think it's been co-opted by conservatives. And while conservatives may dominate it, it is something that is a contested value. So we can reclaim it by talking about progressive freedom. So it means that we all act through our government of the people, to provide public resources to maximize freedom. Therefore, private life and enterprise is not possible without the public. Again, FDR talked about this all the time as well. And freedom is therefore not possible without the public. Many of you have heard the famous Elizabeth Warren speech where she by conservatives talking so that you can counter it consciously with the progressive model of democracy. First of all, you have a strict authoritarian figure who defines right and wrong and rules through punishment. We'll get to it in a minute, but Scott Walker embodies that authority figure. Self-discipline is what makes one moral. If one is not moral, one is not disciplined and therefore will not succeed in the marketplace, which is moral and is the decider of who basically wins and loses. You have responsibility for yourself alone first. That's critically important because it denies this idea of community, of all of us being each other's brothers, sisters, keepers. Democracy provides maximum liberty to seek your own self-interest without responsibility for others. If you think of conservative economics, this is a perfect example of the conservative economics. It's to seek your own self-interest, which for conservatives, economists is profit without having to take responsibility for others. So success comes from being self-disciplined. If you are not successful, it means that you are immoral, and therefore you deserve your lack of success. The public is immoral as it takes away incentives for personal and private success. There is also a fundamental truth that's hidden where the private depends on the public. And this is critical for us to talk about as progressives, that the public is all of us and that private prosperity depends on the public, which is all of us working together as a community. So the next video was going to be a Scott Walker interview from the Young America's Foundation, relatively new video. We play the videos in the correct spots and then just pause the replay. So I want to take a look briefly at the 2014 election and kind of breaking down what I consider to be critical framing mistakes that we can learn from as we move along here. So here's a point where you could all respond in the Q&A section, and many of you are going to get this right away. But I find it interesting. I think it's not easy to tell. If you read some of the critical points there, a leader in the Midwest, leading economy, public education system producing graduates who have skills and education to compete in the workforce. State finding ways to balance job creation with protecting resources, especially in areas like agriculture and mining, things like that. So just a quick question here. If you want to respond, whose vision do you think that is for Wisconsin? So might take a while, but we can keep going because I won't get to the answer until later. So let's look at the first campaign ad. This is Scott Walker's first campaign ad, was titled Anthem. Many of you probably heard it. It was often related to actually a Reagan ad, where he talks about a renewal in Wisconsin. The key point that I want to make was this section right here, where he talks about the goal is that everyone who wants a job can find a job. Less dependence on government, more dependence on individual hard work and pride. So there you go. I mean, there is the conservative frame evoked perfectly. Less dependence on government, more dependence on individual hard work and pride. So how did Walker evoke the conservative frame? And this is really important because this was something that wasn't identified early on. First of all, Scott Walker has functionally become the embodiment of the strict authoritarian father. He represents everything that conservatives think is moral and good about their ideology. Critically important to understand that this is not about them being mean or nasty or underhanded. They believe they're moral. Talking about the public being immoral, taking away incentive for private success. That only the private sector can create jobs. That is a moral statement, that the private sector has the moral responsibility to create jobs. It is immoral for the public to interfere. That's where the whole job creation thing is important. Therefore, those who do not have jobs are undisciplined and immoral. So if you're unemployed, it's your own fault because you're not disciplined enough. This should really make a lot of sense to people. Therefore, Scott Walker is the moral conservative leader. So let's just take a quick look at how this relates to some issues. In terms of the economy, you see language like tax and spend that increase bloated red tape to make it harder to create jobs. Again, the government is creating the burden that drops, government is creating the burden that conservatives are relieving and therefore creating more jobs. Again, it has nothing to do with the facts about jobs or employment numbers. It's all about their ideological moral beliefs. And hopefully you understand how critical it is that facts do not counter something as powerful and morally based as this. Education. We see ideas like choice, talking about personal choice, where it is the father of the family making the choice for the family. He has the moral authority to do that, and the government should not interfere. This idea of transparency and accountability is all about punishment. Which schools should be punished because they are failing students. Teachers are failing students. This is very much in the conservative frame. Healthcare. Conservatives succeeded as framing healthcare as a market function. Progressives have failed to make healthcare about something moral and something that is a fundamental right, therefore yielding the moral high ground to conservatives who have succeeded even in Supreme Court decisions in framing healthcare as something that is of the market, which is a conservative value. So you see healthcare costs rising, again, eliminating the government red tape that increases cost, giving families more control. There's the whole family control, personal liberty. And whoever commented that it's from his evangelical upbringing, that is exactly right. It goes back to that whole evangelical idea of capitalism and conservatism being moral. So now let's look at the Burke campaign. And let's just remember that, so the conservatives have put out this incredibly powerful moral statement that evokes every issue, that every issue evokes their frame. So the first ad that Mary Burke put out was called Working for You. Again, many of you probably remember this. It started out with a phrase that her father had a big idea, Trek bicycle, built Trek into a great Wisconsin company, making sure that kids have, and that she is making sure that our kids have the skills and training to succeed, instead of more breaks for big money special interests. But when you linguistically and cognitively break down those ideas, we see that they strongly evoke the same conservative ideas that the Scott Walker campaign did. That her father was a private industrialist, the kind of strict father who's creating this company to benefit his family. The idea that kids have skills and training to succeed, that means in the workplace. So we are seeing the conservative view of education evoke that education is to get a job, as opposed to a more progressive idea of education, which shows kids what's even possible in life. And then this idea of always evoking big money special interests. The conservatives have succeeded in equating big money special interests with unions. So that's a critical error in messaging. In terms of the same issues that Scott Walker messaged, we see on the economy. Mary Burke talked about creating good jobs, private sector approach, even as the Secretary of the Department of Commerce. She created jobs in the private sector. So we see this evoking the strong conservative frame of job creation in the private sector. Education, again, not to belabor the point, but we see the conservative view of education, it's a way up to a good job. Strong economy. This phrase is interesting, prepared to work hard so they can realize their dreams. Meaning that if you don't work hard, that you cannot participate in the American dream. And then the idea of accountability measures where accountability is for punishment. On healthcare. So, and we've lost our screen share momentarily. There we go. Okay, we're back. So in healthcare, again, we see strongly evoking the conservative market idea of healthcare. Fiscally responsible, families getting health coverage that they need, affordable and accessible healthcare. She even strongly evoked the Walker administration over and over in her campaign. So a lot of really critical errors. So back when I asked you whose vision it was, that was Mary Burke. That was from Cap Times article just a week before the election about how she revealed warmth in her work ethic. So the point being is that if you have an election for governor with a Democrat and Republican, if you can't tell from a candidate's vision if they are conservative or progressive, we have a serious problem. So let's look at the critical first steps. First of all, that there is a difference between moral and partisan on issues. Second, identify the moral frame. We've looked at several different issues in terms of what the moral frame is, and you need to identify that moral frame. We have to understand that moderates and centrists, as we consider them, are really biconceptuals, which means that, and pretty much everybody on this webinar is going to be biconceptual, which means in some aspects of your life, most aspects, you are progressive, and in some aspects of your life, you are conservative. At some point in your life, you watched and understood a John Wayne film, or you were a strict parent with your child. Something like that, you have the capacity for authoritarian thought, just as most conservatives have capacity for empathy. The idea is to find out where those conservatives have empathy and on what issues. You then speak to them on that issue in the progressive frame, which activates the progressive frame in them and reinforces it, and therefore the same message in the progressive frame can work on every issue. So the idea is speaking to those values, coming up with messaging that is based in the progressive frame and progressive values, allows you to communicate outside issue silos and bring divergent issue groups together, which we're currently not doing. And many of the questions submitted in advance asked about specific issues, many of which we just looked at in the everything that's possible in the world. And that's the kind of thing that we should be saying as progressives. So with all of this in your head right now, I want to leave you with a message that there's hope for everyone. And it's basically, it's all of us. And it starts with all of us. Because humans naturally evolve for empathy. And that's evidenced by scientific research. We have these things called mirror neurons that were discovered about 20 years ago by Antonio Damasio in Italy. And what mirror neurons do is they allow me to experience the same neural activity in my brain watching you carry out an action or feel an emotion or experience an emotion as you physically experiencing it. So we are all connected physically through these mirror neurons, and it's because of that that the ideas of empathy can be spread very quickly if we evoke it. We also know that humans unconsciously seek connection, physical connections with others in the world. And what's important is much of this has been suppressed by this conservative self-interest frame dominance that we've been talking about tonight. If you are only thinking you're responsible for yourself, that goes a long way toward propagating fear and jealousy and greed and things like that, as opposed to more of empathetical thought where we are all a community, we all look out for and take care of each other, which provides a great sense of security and well-being. So through framing, we all need to start strengthening this. So think of it this way. Conservative dominance of framing has created an epidemic. We know that progressive ideas and vision are dying. We know it's happening globally. To give you an example, the map that just popped up, the darker red shaded areas are places that have higher rates of gun ownership. And where we see this idea of self-reliance and self-interest spreading is where we see these deeper shades of red and greater gun ownership, because people are feeling afraid, they're feeling insecure, they don't feel a safe, secure community is around them. So framing is the cure. It acts as a cognitive vaccine. However, if there's just a small number of people, say just the people on this webinar or the people from a framing workshop, if they're the only ones that get vaccinated, it'll have little effect. If you have a measles vaccine, it won't work if only 10 people are vaccinated. What we need is large-scale, we need a large-scale vaccination of framing. It provides the cure for conservative dominance because you will be aware of it and you'll be able to consciously change public discourse. And a large vaccinated population will be very effective and then, in effect, change public discourse. So, and I'm going to have to get back to the screen share here. There we go. Okay. So what I've done is I've created this website, Authentic Framing for the Future. The link will be posted. It's actually linked to the invite you received. It's also going to be linked to the archive, and it's a resource. It's unique. Nobody else is doing this in the United States. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this webinar as an introduction is to say this is something that we can all do together. It's something you can have access to, whether you listen to it live or the archive. And this is something that we can all do together as a community. And it is available to anyone. There's no wall in terms of campaigns or partisanship or anything like that. This is something that everybody should have access to. It's for individuals, organizations, and I will be providing ongoing resources, monthly webinars with recorded archives, Thinking Points Journal, real-time framing discussions, which are hosted on my website. It's up there now. And there is a subscription that's available. It's just $100 a year, and for that, there's going to be monthly webinars. I will fix the fix the video link and figure out why that's not working. There's going to be a bi-weekly Thinking Points Journal starting mid-May, and then the 24/7 discussion forum. The other thing that's on the website is resources to book workshops, consulting for campaigns or organizations. And the idea is I want to develop a community of framers, not only through the website, but all over places, everywhere in the state and beyond. So with that, if anybody has questions, I am seeing your questions at the moment. I'm going to stop the screen share there. Scroll down, and again, I do have all of your comments about the videos not working, and I'll get them fixed. So the question forum. The other thing I will say is, if you're typing in questions while you're doing that, in terms of specific issues, on the website, on my website, which is www.frame4future.com, there are videos, basically fundamental framing videos that are up there now that deal with the issues that people ask about. And people ask about economics, income inequality, climate change and environment, messaging, and healthcare, the women's freedom issue in terms of not only women's freedom in healthcare, but overall women's freedom in society. And that is something that is dealt with on the website, as well as public schools and labor unions. So those are up on the website right now. So you can just watch those videos. They're about 10 minutes long, and they go in depth. And I've also been reminded to remind everybody, since we have quite a few people on, that there are workshops coming up in Green Bay. So this Saturday in Green Bay at the Brown County Dems office from 10 to 2:30, there will be an in-person workshop. It's going to be a great in-depth look at this. We're going to really dive into it in more in depth. And then on the 16th, so 2 weeks later, another Saturday in Menasha, Wisconsin at the Goodwill Community Center, same time, 10 to 2:30. And that's going to be a subsequent progressive session that will build on the session on the 2nd. But since you've seen this webinar and you're getting some background in framing, I wouldn't hesitate to sign up for the 16th. And again, I'm not seeing any other questions or comments. So thank you all very much for coming on. Look, I'll send out an email as soon as the archive is up, and it'll have the PowerPoint link as well as the audio video links. So you'll be able to enjoy those videos. And thank you very much. Go to the website. It's www.frame4future.com and look at all the resources that are available. So thanks a lot.